Today, we're actually going to end our long season in the book of Mark. So just know that that's today. I don't know if that makes you cheer, be sad. We're moving on. But speaking of moving on, the best gift I think you can give yourself over the next 7 days is to fully immerse yourself in what we're doing through the Easter experiences here at Epic. I'm so excited to start walking through personally myself the artist gallery that our own artists have done. I've heard things, I've overheard. I've been at the kitchen table when Shauna's been on a Zoom call with some of our artist community. I'm just telling you, it's going to be incredible. Good Friday and then Easter. So that's the best gift you can give yourself. The best gift you can give people in your life, I think, is to invite them to join you for Easter at Epic. Really do believe. I mean, guys, this is our whole thing. Like, this isn't just a once a year. It's our whole thing. Right? I mean, Paul says to the Corinthians, if Jesus hasn't been raised from the dead, everything we do every other day, everything we do every other Sunday, it's just pointless. It's not pointless, though, because Jesus rose from the dead, and he's put resurrection power in those of us that trust him. Easter means that anything is possible. It also means that the worst thing in your life won't be the last thing, but the last thing will be the best thing. I'm in for it. Amen. I can tell 4 of you are. It's like, Easter. Yeah, Easter. And again, you probably know this, but if you can't get to 11 o'clock on time, you should come to 12 o'clock at Easter, okay? That's just free. That is for you. I simply want to begin my message today with this statement. What seems extravagant to one person is completely appropriate to another person. What seems extravagant to one person, it is completely appropriate to another person. I mean, take me, for instance. If you know me, and lots of you do know me really well, you know that I am not a collector of things, and I'm not big into possessions. I like good shoes, and I only write with G2 pens, but otherwise, I say to my wife often, less than 2% of everything in our house belongs to me. If you were to ask me to locate my college diploma or my seminary diploma, I promise you, if you press me on it, I'll find a transcript, but I don't have a clue where those diplomas are. However, what you might not spend money on, I do. I love having good seats at the Giants game. Yeah. Baseball's back in the neighborhood. Sorry about the parking and traffic. Yay, baseball. I will pay good money for incredible food experiences. And if I get an amazing travel opportunity, I don't mind investing money there. But isn't it funny how we're always judging each other based on what we think is appropriate versus what we think is extravagant? I mean, some of you have roommates or you have family members or you have a spouse or kids, and you're like, why would you spend money on that? But other things, we're like, why would you spend money on that? And it's not just that we compare ourselves to each other when we're talking about what's extravagant or what's appropriate. I want you to think about your former life. I want you to think about some things that you used to think were extravagant that now are so appropriate. I got a couple for you. Ready? Do you remember what you thought the first time you were behind someone in line who paid $12 for avocado toast? I'm getting into your psyche right here. Here's what you thought, I promise. You're watching them, and you're like, $12 for a piece of bread, and they don't even get the whole avocado. That's extravagant. Last week, some of you same people were at a cafe. Only $12 for a piece of bread and some avocado. That's a great deal. It's funny, somebody was up at Blue Bottle above us here just between the last service. Shauna and I went up to get a coffee, and they're like, so where does this rank on the things that are extravagant or appropriate? I'm like, $6 for a coffee? Who wouldn't? I mean, but I remember I used to think, how many of you, and again, don't feel all elitist here or shy, how many of you remember when you used to fly coach? Don't play me. Half of us are like, Ben, that was every flight, including the one I got back from yesterday. Some of you remember, though, you used to fly coach. And do you remember when you were flying coach exclusively what you thought about those people in first class? How could they spend 10 times as much as I spent? I mean, we're all going to the same place. And now you act like there aren't even other options than first class. Some of you, seriously, you don't even know that coach still exists. So I'm back here in 39D, and you don't even know that I'm on planet Earth. You don't even know. It's like, what? It's crazy, right? What used to be extravagant over time becomes appropriate. I remember when I first moved here, lots of you remember this. You remember when you first moved here and wherever you came from, you didn't have to pay to park? Anybody remember that? Like, you didn't have to pay to park. You didn't have to learn how to read signs. You didn't have to read, all the things. So when you move here, you're like, it's extravagant. Shauna, we are not paying $3.75 an hour to park. Now you get so tired of finding a space like, dude, here's $20, just find us a spot and keep the change. You know, it gets crazy. What we used to think is outrageous, now we begin to think it's like appropriate. Now, my definition for extravagant that we're going to use today is this: extravagant, lack of restraint in spending money or use of resources. Really want to highlight that word resources. Money is part of what we're going to talk about, but not really. But resources we all have. Even if some of us have more money than each other, we all have the same amount of time. We're all given a different hand in terms of how our attention works, but we all have attention to give. Every person in this room and watching online right now, we all have some worship to give. You're like, Ben, I'm not a religious person. I don't care. You worship. We all worship. So we have resources to give. So extravagant, a lack of restraint in spending my money or how I use the resources that I have been given. And you may be thinking, Ben, if the vision of Epic Church is to see an increasing number of people in San Francisco orient their entire lives around Jesus, what does that have to do with your conversation about appropriate versus extravagant? Here's what it has to do with it. Listen closely. The more you and I orient our entire lives around Jesus, what we used to think was extravagant begins to seem incredibly appropriate. I just promise you, the more you see him, the more you get on board with trusting him, the more you obey what he calls you to do, the more you contemplate, like we just said in those songs, who he is and what he's done and what it means for us. I promise you, what you used to think was over the top, you now will go, no, this makes total sense. That just happens over time. Anybody can testify to that? The longer you walk with Jesus, you used to think those people were crazy. Now, there are still some crazy people in this room. I'm not pointing them out. I'm just telling you, there's some here. But who I used to think was crazy, like, why are they so passionate in the worship service? It's because they had seen something I hadn't seen yet. What do you think when someone gives a large percentage of their income away? Is that a little excessive? Or have you seen enough of the generosity of Jesus that makes some sense? I'll never forget a few years ago, I had a friend in our church tell me, Ben, when I met with my accountant to go over my taxes from last year, he said, hey, I just need to caution you about something. And his accountant cautioned him and said, hey, man, I know that you care about things, but I just think you're giving a little too much to your local church. Listen to me. What seemed extravagant to the accountant was completely appropriate to this individual. Why? He had seen something. And so I want you to ask the question, when you see people worshiping passionately in this room, does that seem a little over the top? Or does it make sense because you've seen how worthy Jesus is? And by the way, we all have something we value most, and it's completely appropriate to us to do whatever it takes to get it. People that will sit in here with their arms crossed, go watch them at the Giants game. Go watch them in a concert. Go watch them at their son's T-ball game. Going crazy. Like, yeah, but in here, like, I'm not passionate. Listen, dude, we saw you yesterday. You know what I mean? Guys, I want to talk to you today, a message I'm calling Appropriate Extravagance. Appropriate Extravagance. We're in Mark chapter 14. You can go there if you have a scripture on you. You can also watch it on the screen. Mark 14, verses 1 through 11. And the scene we're walking into is happening on a Wednesday. It's that Wednesday. It's the Wednesday that's 2 days before what we will come to call Good Friday. And there's so much in here. I want to say to you with 100% confidence, I believe God has a word for you today. My hope is that you will have eyes and ears to hear and see. Stand with me. I want to read this to us. I've never taught this text in this way. I've never discovered what God has given me, and so I believe that it's not just for me. I'm grateful if it's just for me, but I believe it's for us collectively. So here we go, Mark 14. Now the Passover and the festival of unleavened bread were only 2 days away, and the chief priests and the teachers of the law were scheming to arrest Jesus secretly and kill him. But not during the festival, they said, or the people may riot. While he was in Bethany reclining at the table in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume made of pure nard. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. Some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, why this waste of perfume? In other words, why this extravagance? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor. Listen to this. And they rebuked her harshly. Don't miss that. She's giving everything she has to Jesus, and they're like, that's too much. Jesus is going to chime in. Leave her alone, he says. Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, and you can help them anytime you want, but you will not always have me. She did what she could. Some of you just need to underline it and preach to yourself right there. She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial. Truly, I tell you, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her. Then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests to betray Jesus to them. They were delighted to hear this and promised to give him money. So he watched for an opportunity to hand him over. Don't miss the irony here. This woman's waiting for an opportunity to hand over her most prized possession for Jesus' sake. Judas is waiting for the prime opportunity to hand Jesus over for his own sake. What are you after? What seems appropriate? What seems extravagant? Have a seat. God's speaking right now, and I believe he will continue to. There's so much that stands out to me about this text. It's 2 days before Jesus is going to the cross. He's in the home of Simon the leper. I love this part of the story that can get lost. Simon apparently used to be a leper, probably cleansed by Jesus, but he's still known as Simon the leper. How would you like that? Like, whose house are we going to for dinner? Simon the leper. Well, he's not actually a leper anymore. We just don't know what else to call him. So that's Simon the leper's home. And you see this beautiful gesture from a woman. Now, no surprise if you understand this historical context, but women weren't allowed to be at banquets where men were partying unless they were playing the role of a servant. And ladies, for all of you, and men, for all of us, we should be elated by how Jesus keeps elevating women. Right? Only me and a few others. We should be elated. We should be inspired. He's elevating the role of women. He's doing this all throughout his life. If you think we live in a misogynistic culture, you may not be wrong, but it's nothing compared to what he was sitting in. He's going, no, she did something beautiful. He doesn't say, well, you don't belong. Custom is this. Here's the culture. You're not a guy. No. He's just like, this is beautiful. Don't miss it. Now, Mark doesn't give us her name. In Mark's gospel, she remains nameless. But in John's gospel, he tells us that it's Mary. And all of a sudden, you're like, which Mary? This is Mary whose sister was Martha and whose brother is Lazarus. One thing that stands out to me about this text, that really an aha moment, and I believe it will be for you too, is, you and I live in a world that is seduced by appearances. And to be seduced, one definition is simply this: to be led astray by persuasion or false promises. And sometimes we think, because of the onset of social media and all we deal with in the 21st century, we think that the appearance thing is just now bursting onto the scene of our world. But you need to know and can hear from Jesus' teaching that everyone, the human default has always been to care most about appearances. Even the Sermon on the Mount, you remember what Jesus says about giving and praying and fasting? Do not do this to be seen. Don't do it. He tells the religious leaders, you love the best seats of honor. You love to be called by the official title. You just love for everyone to notice that you're the big shot. And in the first century and still in the 21st century, we're being seduced by appearances. Now, I want you to be aware of what appears to be the case in this text from 4 different groups of people: religious leaders, Judas, Mary, and Jesus. Because if you just get things as they appear to be, you're going to miss out. So think about this. The religious leaders have appeared to care about God. Judas has appeared to be a disciple of Jesus. This woman has appeared to have wasted her money. And 2 days from now, Jesus will appear to be weak and defeated. Let me give you a word right here. Things are not always as they appear to be, and unfortunately, we are not always who we appear to be. Most of us just know your Sunday self, which may or may not be your true self. If we got around the people who knew you most, who would they tell us you are? It's really fun and sometimes funny and sometimes sad when I make a connection in the real world with someone who knows you. And I'm like, yeah, they're part of our church. And sometimes they're like, I know they are the nicest person, da, 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 da. And sometimes they're like, they're showing me your picture because they're like, I don't think we're talking about the same person. I'm like, no, yes. They're in our church. Things are not always they appear to be, and unfortunately, sometimes you and I are not always who we appear to be. But Jesus sees through all that. He sees through the LinkedIn side. He sees through who I'm presenting myself to you today. He sees through what we're putting on our social. He sees through it all, and he sees right to the core of who we are. Right to the core of who we are. And here's what we've got to know about that. In the most significant moments of your life, you can only bring who you have become. It's a word some of you need to walk home with today. Like, Ben, I drove. No, this is one of those you need to walk home. In the most significant moments of your life, you will only and always bring who you have actually become. Here in Bethany, in this text, it's an enormous moment. Let's stop kidding ourselves that all moments are equal. They are not, are they? Are we not going to spend the rest of this week celebrating a moment that's a little bit more significant than other moments in history? Guys, all moments aren't equal. All hours aren't equal. And every one of us, just like in this moment for Mary and Jesus and Judas and the religious leaders, they find themselves in a significant moment. And you know what we try to do when the moments get weightier and more significant? We try to bring our best self. But here's what you've got to know. Whatever your best self is, you can only bring your true self into every moment that you go into. That's all you have. And so in this scene, what's happening is Judas is just bringing who he is. Jesus is just bringing who he is. The religious leaders, they're just bringing who they are. And Mary, God bless her, she's bringing who she is. You see, when you get married, that's a huge moment. That's bigger than other moments. But no matter how big that wedding is, how important it is, the only man or woman you bring into that marriage is the man or woman you've become before it. When you get assigned a specific role in your company, that's huge. But the only man or woman you bring into that new significant role in your company is the woman or man that you actually are. It doesn't matter what the world says about me. Oh, the church is growing, da-da-da. I'm still just bringing whoever Ben Pilgreen is, right? And we live in a world that has a jacked up scorecard, and so we keep trying to win a game that God's never asked us to play. And so I want you just to think about these people have appeared to be a certain way. See, the Pharisees, they had even deceived themselves. We are people who care about God. Judas deceived the other 11. I'm with him. I'm a follower. In the scene, everyone thinks Mary has appeared to have wasted over a year's earnings. And when they look at Jesus on the cross, they're going to go, what a waste, because he appears to be defeated. So for you, your energy and attention and your time into who you appear to be or into who you actually are. And by the way, when your earthly life is over and you step into eternity, the only person you will bring with you there is who you've actually become. Please care. Please care about who you are. You've got limited time, limited energy. Give yourself to who you are becoming. Now, in this text, what you might think if you just saw this one story, sometimes we see a story and we're like, I bet that just happened once. So when you see the religious leaders trying to kill Jesus, you're like, oh, they had a bad day. When you see the disciples arguing about this woman being extravagant and saying all this, you're like, oh, they just were off. Or you see Mary doing something crazy. I mean, she's doing something crazy. She's doing this religious thing, but she's not thinking straight is what they think. But here's what I want you to know. All of the people that I just mentioned, in this moment, they're not being different than who they actually had become. They're just doing what they had been doing and being what they had been being. Let me show it to you this way. You may think the religious leaders now, they just start to want to kill Jesus. But in Mark chapter 3, if you guys remember way back in the fall, we did, you're like, no, I don't remember, Ben. I don't either. Everybody's like, you remember when you said? I was like, no, but that sounds so good. Let me write it down. Mark chapter 3, verse 6, Jesus has just healed a man in the synagogue on the Sabbath. And here's what we read about the religious leaders. Then the Pharisees, verse 6, went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus. Isn't that crazy? Mark 14, they're not just now going, oh, let's figure out how to kill him. No, they've been planning that for a while. They had become men of murder. They had become men with evil hearts. They had become men who cared about the outside religious observances while their heart was wasting away. They had become those kind of men. Now, in our story for today, what Mark says is that there's a group of people at Simon the leper's home that when the woman pours all the perfume of great expense on Jesus, that there was a bunch of people that were indignant. But when John gives us this story, he doesn't say it was a bunch of people. He calls out one guy specifically. Don't you always love the group being called out when you're in trouble? But individual praise when you're the one who did something right? Listen to what John says, John 12, 4 through 6. Same moment, John's account. But one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected to what the woman did. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. So that's what the appearance is from Judas. Judas is like, it is worth more than a year's wages. Verse 6, he did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. Judas is saying he's appearing to care about the poor. You could have given this to the poor, but John's giving us the commentaries like, he didn't care about the poor because I know Judas. Judas only and always cared about Judas, period. He used to help himself to the money. Now, the question we should all be asking is, Jesus, what are you doing making Judas the CFO and treasurer? He's not working at Epic Church. Sorry. Really important to know that this wasn't random or a one-time occurrence. Friends, Judas did not have a greedy moment. Judas, through his decisions and habits, had become a greedy man. You know how we play this out in our lives? When we raise our voice and yell at someone in our home or in our team. I don't know what got into me. Well, you got into you. I can't believe that came out. Right? This is Jesus going, whatever's in a person, the good man brings the good from inside of him. The bad man brings the bad from inside of him. Out of the overflow of your heart, your life speaks. So the religious leaders have made a habit and become someone. Judas has made a habit and become someone, but thankfully it works to the positive. Aren't you glad? Do you think this is the first time Mary ever got her worship on? Nuh-uh. Oh, listen to this. You don't just become a negative person in the same way and show up in the moments. Luke chapter 10, verse 39, Jesus shows up to Mary and Martha's home. Talking about Martha, Luke writes, Martha, had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. You see this moment with the alabaster jar, it's not Mary's first rodeo with Jesus. She had already done this. And then you get to John 11, verse 32. Lazarus, her brother, is dead. I want you to see her posture once again with Jesus. Verse 32. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I want to focus in on when she saw Jesus, she fell at his feet. Listen closely. Mary doesn't have a crazy religious moment with this alabaster jar. Mary had made this her lifestyle. Mary had made this a habit. She had been experienced giving Jesus her attention and her love and her devotion and her worship and her focus and her obedience. So when this moment comes, it makes complete sense for Mary to give up something that's pretty valuable to gain something that's way more valuable. You see, all of us are after something most, and whatever you're after most, that's the thing that you covet. And covet, we think about it as a bad word, and it can be. It shows up in the Ten Commandments. But guys, I'll just give you some positive examples so you understand. The word covet means this: yearn to possess or have. Okay? A lot of you know this about me. Mine and Shauna's oldest son is graduating from high school 6 weeks from yesterday. That's crazy. He's a baseball player. He pitches on Tuesdays. Guess where I am on Tuesdays? Guess who changed staff meetings so that I could be that? I covet watching him play the senior season. Right? Try to meet with me at that time. No. I covet that. Date night, you're not getting that time either. I covet the time I have with Shauna. Whatever you're after most, you covet. For the religious leaders, they coveted power and control. For Judas, he coveted wealth. For Mary, she coveted Jesus. Yearn to have. So what do you covet? What you value most will determine what you see as extravagant or appropriate. What do you value most? When I tell you that 100 or so people spent 4 hours yesterday serving kids in our city, giving up their maybe only off day this week, is that extravagant to you? Because they would tell you it's appropriate for their love for God, their love for this church. When your friends give a ton of money away that they worked hard to earn, do you see that as over the top or appropriate? When you see your friends in this room worshiping passionately, is that too much? Have they gone too far? Or like, no. When you hear about 4 families moving to San Francisco, leaving everything behind to start a new church, crazy? Or totally appropriate because God had changed their life and they wanted to see a whole community rise up and do the same? Appropriate or extravagant? Judas gives Jesus up for 30 pieces of silver. Mary gives up her most prized possession for Jesus. And I know what we think in this moment, so I want to say it. We're always comparing ourselves to people, right? So you're trying to figure out, are you more like Mary, or more like Judas? And here's the safe thing we all do, right? I'll say this too, so you don't have to be the only one. I'm somewhere in the middle of Mary and Judas. Anybody? And I think you're probably right. I think I'm probably right. I think I'm not quite as devoted. I don't own an alabaster jar for starters. I'm not quite as devoted as Mary, but I am not selling Jesus out. I'm somewhere in the middle, and I think that's true maybe for 100% of us, but I want you to know this. While you might not identify yet with Mary and you might not identify yet with Judas, all of us, I think, are becoming more like Mary or more like Judas. So how are we trending? What trajectory are we on? Well, what is Jesus going to do to Mary's perceived extravagance? I mean, let's just imagine we don't know the story. We could imagine maybe Jesus saying this: Mary, you know, I only have the clothes on my back. I'm not kind of a big attention guy. You can imagine Jesus saying, Mary, the guys are right. You took it a little too far. Like Mary, maybe sell not that jar, but maybe what's the next best possession you have? You could give that to me. You guys, he doesn't do that. He defends her. They are rebuking her. He starts rebuking them. He says, Jesus, should she give it to the poor? He's like, no. Jesus, 50% to the poor, 50% to you. He's like, no. What she did is appropriate. It's appropriate. It is not outrageous. It is not outlandish. It is not excessive. It is not extravagant. You guys, I'm about to give my life for the world. It makes sense. Does that move you at all? And if not, man, I'm just praying that stone heart would become a heart of flesh. And you're like, Ben, is it possible to hear this and not be moved? Guys, it is. Judas is in the orbit of Jesus for 1,000 straight days, and his heart never comes close. So you can sit in here and show up at Easter Encounter all 4 nights, Good Friday, all 3 Easter services, and if you don't open your heart and get it transformed by him as you see him, you could be Judas. There's too much at stake. There's too much at stake for me just to give you a pep talk today. Jesus says about what Mary did, it's not a waste, it's beautiful. Here's what you've got to know. What the world calls a waste, Jesus calls beautiful.
Hallelujah. Thank you, Lord Jesus.
Yeah, he's worth that. He is worth that. You know, as Jesus was dying on the cross, the world then, and even the world now, a lot of people talk about it as though it were a waste. If you're the Messiah, save yourself. Why would you give your perfect life for these imperfect people? That's a waste. I don't know about you, but I don't think it's a waste. As a young man who was a sinner desperate for redemption, I think it's the most beautiful thing that I could possibly ever hear. And I don't know about you, but sometimes for me, when I think about Jesus on the cross, you know when those movies come up and they show the crucifixion, I don't know if you're the same. I'm this way with a lot of TV. My wife can tell you. I'm like, tell me what's about to happen. It's true. Right before you go to sleep, I do not need that. My mind is weird enough. But when the crucifixion scene comes, I can barely take it in. Here's why. Emotions of shame and embarrassment start to fill me. Like, oh, you shouldn't have. Oh, I'm not worth it. I can't earn that. And it's as if I'm saying to Jesus, Jesus, what you're doing, it is too extravagant. It's too much. And it's as if he says to me and to you, Ben, I hear you. I hear that you think it's extravagant, but here's what you don't know. Ben, when I think about my heart for you and your friends and your family, Ben, when I think about the fact that I would do anything just to get you into the family, Ben, when I think about what I'm going to do in your life and what I'm going to undo in your life, I need you to know, Ben, it's not too much. I think it's appropriate. And if you haven't heard anything in your entire life, Jesus thinks your life and giving his for it is completely appropriate. And I don't get it, but he's like, it makes sense for me to offer this for you. It just makes sense. I'm going to give you one phrase from this text, and we're going to land it right here. God's moving, and if you don't respond, just know that you could become Judas. He was in the environment all the time, heard the teaching, saw the miracles, saw truth. There's a phrase in here that's going to give you a lot of hope. Anybody ever feel like, oh, I just can't do enough, I can't do enough, I can't do enough, I can't do enough at work, I can't do enough in my faith, I just can't do enough? Listen to what Jesus said about Mary in verse 8. She did what she could. She did what she could. She didn't do what Peter was going to have to do or what John was going to have to do. She just did what she could. And I don't know about you, but I want to end my life going from God saying about me, Ben did what he could. I didn't give him Seth's gift, so I didn't want him to do what Seth could do. I didn't give him Shauna's calling, so I didn't want him to do what Shauna could do. I just wanted Ben to do what he could do. So what can you do? Some of you, what you can do is give him your life today. Some of you, knowing baptism's a step for you, you can identify with him through that immersive experience. Some of you can quit tipping the offering plate and give like God has changed your life because he has. Some of you cannot be self-absorbed, and you can start serving to embody the way of Jesus. Some of you can make an invitation to someone this week that doesn't yet know you go to church, but they'll know it before this week is over. She did what she could. He did what he could. That's all he's asking. What can you do? Let's pray. Let's just ask the Spirit of God to move. Oh, don't shun him. Do not push him away. Do not wish that this thing would end so you can get back to not feeling conflicted about what you're going to do with your life. Oh, whatever it feels like in the moment, I promise you the best future you have is opening yourself up to the Spirit of God. God, you are in this place and you are speaking. Oh God, for the lukewarm hearts, I pray that they would leave on fire with passion to give their lives away for you in whatever way you call them to. God, for the person who's never known you, I pray that in this moment, what they could do, they would do, which is to say, I don't even know what this means, but Jesus, yes, here's my life. God, for the people in this room who have seen some of us live out our faith publicly and privately, and they just think, wow, that just seems excessive. Oh, God, would they leave going, no. It makes sense. It makes total sense. It's not extravagant, it's appropriate. God, we don't want to just be another church. We want to just have another Sunday. We want to experience the presence and power of God. The God who started a church that was unlikely to make it, the God who brought this church through a pandemic, the God who has brought people together from every corner of our earth and called us a family. God, you're not doing this for nothing. God, could we be on a trajectory where it would be said by you about us, he did what he could, she did what she could. That church called Epic, they did all that they could. For a season, all they could get was the basement. They did what they could. God, would you have your way? Make us more like Mary. Help us to trend in her direction. That there would be no price too high, because you are the prize. I want to ask you to stand, or you can come kneel in this space. I'm not sure everything that's happening, but I sense what you sense. This altar is open. For some of you, today is your day of salvation. For some of you, it's a day to quit playing the game and quit acting like the God thing is a part of your life, but yet you're keeping a distance. It's time to come close today. Maybe there's a repentance moment. Maybe there's just an excitement like, yes, Jesus, you're worth it. Seth, lead us, man. I think there's a great tune we're going to sing. You guys can stand. Again, this altar is open. We've got leaders who will pray with you as you need that. How are you trending? Who are you becoming? What is the focus of your life? There's too much at stake.